So this video is really all about the development process 101, right? What's the high-level process that every project goes through from idea to reality, right? A lot of times when you're driving around your city, you'll see developments under construction or you'll see recently built projects, but there was a whole bunch of steps of activity that had to happen before that project was delivered, and I think a lot of times people miss the various pieces and parts that go into that process. So that's what we're here to cover today. I was always taught, and I think it makes the most sense to think about the fact that every single project, when it starts as an idea, either falls into one of two buckets, right? You either have a site that is looking for a use or a use that is looking for a site. So let me explain that. Sometimes a developer already has control or already has an idea about a site. There's a piece of property on the corner of two roads and they say, you know what, somebody should do something with that parcel, right? That is a site. Now the question is, what is the highest and best use for that site? The other side of that coin is the use looking for a site. So a developer might say, I'm a developer of multifamily rental communities, or I'm a single family home developer, or I develop office projects or medical office or warehouses, right? So that firm, that group, that person has a use that they know they're going to develop. Now they're just looking for a site. So really all projects fall in the beginning into one of those two buckets. Either they're a use looking for a site or a site looking for a use. Once that parcel is identified, the next process is thinking of the investment thesis, right? So real estate development is an investment game, right? It is all part of a huge investment process. And without that, development really doesn't happen. So the first step after you've identified your parcel, before anything else, is to come up with the investment thesis, right? What is it that makes this the right site, and what is it that makes the use that we're intending to build on that site, the highest and best use for that site? And there's a lot more involved in it, but that's kind of the rub, is you got to figure out your investment thesis before you can do anything else. Next, there's kind of a bunch of processes that happen all at once that I'll put under the feasibility bucket, right? So you need to ultimately get site control. You need to do a little bit of underwriting to start and some preliminary due diligence. The due diligence really kind of falls into two buckets, and due diligence really just means investigation. There's due diligence that happens before site control and due diligence that happens after site control. Site control really just means that you are under contract with the seller. As the developer, you have a written contract that says, if these things happen, we will exchange funds and I will own the site. So in that part of time, you have a window of time that you are under contract, but you haven't closed. But during that time, you have what's called site control. Nobody else can come in and buy that parcel. The seller can't sell it to anybody else, right? So you have control for a window of time, and that could be as short as 30 days to years. But you have site control, and sometimes you're paying money up front for that site control. Sometimes you have a free look period where you don't pay for the first 30, 60, or 90 days, and then you have to put down a deposit. But ultimately, when you have site control, the parcel can't be transacted to anybody else. So before you have site control, the diligence that you're going to work on is probably remote in nature. It's not going to involve actually working on site. Again, you don't have site control. There's the physical reasons for that. If you don't have site control, you probably don't have permission to be on that land, so you can't do anything on the site. There's also the financial aspect of preliminary due diligence, where before you have site control, it doesn't really make financial sense to spend a bunch of money that you may not get back if you don't actually control the site. So if you went off and spent $50,000 on due diligence on a site you don't have control of, you may go to get site control and the site's already gone and you've just wasted your money. So there's kind of preliminary due diligence that's before site control, and then due diligence that happens after site control. But this is all under the feasibility bucket. You're also going to be spending a lot of time doing financial underwriting, right? Do the rents that we think we can get on this finished project match with the cost that we think we're going to have to make, or the investment we're going to have to make, and the cost we're going to have to invest in the construction and the entitlements and the rezoning and a bunch of stuff we'll talk about in a minute. But is the total value that we're going to create more than the prices we're going to have to pay to create that development? And that's your basic financial underwriting. And assuming that checks out, the next thing you're going to look at is, does this parcel have zoning? And a lot of times the parcel will be zoned for the type of project you want to do. That makes things more simple. And sometimes it's not. If the site doesn't have the zoning that you need to do the project you want to do, you'll have to go through a rezoning process, right? And that has to happen before almost anything else, because if you don't have the zoning, you're not allowed to build the project that you want to build. Next is another kind of parallel process of entitlements, preliminary design, and kind of costing, right? So you had this investment thesis, you have done your preliminary underwriting, but until you know what the actual costs of the project are going to be, until you have your entitlements, and I'll link to that video that I shared before about entitlements, but until you have permission from the local municipality to actually build the building, you can't go forward. And then also having your design in place, right? What's actually going to be built? You've got to understand the footprint of the building, you've got to understand the horizontal infrastructure, utilities, parking, all that stuff that goes along with the project. And you've got to understand the vertical component of design. And it's kind of iterative, right? Because you'll create a design or preliminary design, you'll get that price, the pricing may match what you need it to be, or you may have to go back to the drawing board, literally, and do some redesign, reprice, redesign, but eventually you'll get to a place where the design and the pricing match your investment thesis and match your underwriting, and so you're kind of internally greenlit, and then you can go to the next step. Once you have your entitlements and your building design and your horizontal site plan design, you can start construction, right? So construction could take, 10 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. It could take a long period of time, but that is when you're under construction. You're going to be building the actual building. Once construction is complete, you'll have a phase that's called lease up or a sellout period. So if it's a for sale product, you're going to be selling your homes or condos. If it is a rental property, you're going to be leasing up. So you go from an empty building that is finished to a building that is fully leased up. That's the lease up period. Once your building is leased up, and during lease up, you're in the operations phase of the development. So right, you actually have to operate the asset. It is a building with tenants, so you have to make sure that it's functioning the way it needs to, that there's property management, that the building's being taken care of, maintenance, all that fun stuff. Once it is fully leased up and fully operational, most developers make a decision. Sometimes the decision was made a long time ago, but the next decision point is, are we going to hold this asset for a long period of time, or are we going to sell, right? So you got to make that decision. Are you going to exit, or are you going to hold the asset for a long period of time? So again, that's a quick overview. It wasn't meant to be in depth. There are other videos that I've done in the past that will go into some of these verticals a little bit more deeply, but just wanted to give you an overall process from kind of idea to completion of what does that development process look like for pretty much every type of project you can think of. If you've got any questions, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. If there's anything I can go more deep on or any future video ideas you'd have, love to hear them. So please drop them in the comments below.